Your turn to Press TV. It's news review time. Now, in the hours ahead, senior diplomats from the United States and Russia will be sitting down for talks on issues straining their bilateral relations. But even before the meeting, both sides are voicing pessimism. Russian envoy Sergei Ryabkov says that he is disappointed by the signals that the U.S. and the EU are sending before the Geneva talks. He says that the U.S. is insistent on getting unilateral concessions from Russia, but that Moscow will not agree to any such concession. And the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that many of Moscow's proposals are simply non-starters. The Kremlin that's seeking a new security arrangement with the White House. The dispute over Ukraine will likely top the agenda. Also, arms control, human rights, and conflicts around the globe will likely be brought up. The talk will be held on Sunday and Monday. A Russia-NATO meeting is scheduled for Wednesday. Okay, that was the intro to the story. Now let me invite a couple of guests and experts and see what they think about it. So joining me will be John Bosnett, journalist, activist, and political analyst in Belgrade. Also, we'll have Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author in London. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Now over to Belgrade. John, Russia is asking for this meeting, but on what ground could it be rest assured that it will get what it wants? That's the guarantee for its security, given, you know, the performance of the West.
Well, that's a very good question, because I can say for a fact that there is no way that Russia can be certain to get what it requests in these meetings, and therefore the objective would be to create some sort of a series of punishments for non-fulfillment, as in any normal contract. A timeline, targets for fulfillment, and then a punishment or a penalty to be paid or to be suffered by the party that might not fulfill its side of the agreement. That is the only way to secure these talks.
Now, Marcus, as you just heard in the intro, there are negative words and signals coming from both sides. So, and this is while the talks have not even started. So what could you expect to come out of these talks?
Well, first of all, I should say that I welcome the forthcoming meeting between the Americans and the Russians concerning the Ukraine crisis. And I also welcome the reports we have been receiving in the last few days that the Americans may offer the Russians the possibility of Washington scaling down NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, which indicates that Russia has, as many of us have said for many years now, a legitimate grievance over NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, which is a gross violation of the NATO-Russia Founding Treaty of 1997. But that said, am I optimistic? Am I hopeful in the long term that the forthcoming meeting will produce positive results? No, I am not. Why? Firstly, the Americans will not put into writing that they will not seek NATO membership for Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia. Secondly, the Americans will not withdraw NATO soldiery and weaponry from Eastern Europe, including the Baltic states. As I said moments ago, the NATO-Russia Founding Treaty of 1997 strictly prohibits the stationing of even one NATO soldier, one NATO tank in Eastern Europe. Thirdly, the Americans and the British will continue supplying weaponry to Ukraine, including high-tech weapon systems such as missiles, which are a threat to Russian national security. And fourthly, the Americans will not pledge, either in writing or orally, that they will not extend their missile defense system in Eastern Europe, the components of which are in Poland and Romania, into Ukraine. Right. Which could become an offensive missile system, which would pose a grave threat to Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent. Right. So I am not optimistic whatsoever, even if a positive development comes out of the meeting. in the long term, we will be back in this situation again because the Americans are intent on bringing Ukraine into NATO. The Americans will not withdraw their aggressive naval presence from the Black Sea. They will not stop refurbishing the Ukrainian ports of Okhotsk and Odessa, which will soon accommodate American and British warships. And quite frankly, the statements from the American Secretary of State recently, Antony Blinken, in which he said that once Russia sends its troops into another country, it's very difficult to get those troops out. That was inversion at its most inverted, coming from an American politician, and America has over 800 bases in the world. Right. Including one of outside of America, that is, and one of the largest American bases is in Kosovo and Metohija, a region of Serbia, and there are over 6,000 American soldiers in Kosovo and Metohija. So no, I am not optimistic in the long term about the forthcoming talks.
Marcus, they also got the response from the Russians. The Russians said, once America is on your soil, you should be frightened, getting looted and raped and all that. Now, John. Even if the U.S. puts this in writing, I don't think that this is guaranteed. U.S. did this regarding the Iran nuclear deal, for instance, and they've been, taking a lot of time trying to revive it, but nothing on the ground, nothing palpable yet. We're hoping something will happen. So what is it that could actually ease this tension and situation between the West and Russia?
Well, once again, and I do agree with every syllable uttered by your other guest today. He's right on every single point. The fact of the matter is that unless the discussions are started with the concept of guarantees, with the written enunciation of what would be the penalty for any violation, then there's no use in making an agreement. So the writing down of the terms is the starting point. Whether America's words on paper are worth the ink they're printed with is another question. But first, there must be a written deal. Then, if the deal is not complied with, there must be distinct, clearly lined up and enunciated penalties and options for the side whose rights are being violated. After that stage, it's a question of what action would be taken, in this case, obviously, by Russia to compensate for the actions taken outside of the terms of the deal. And I would suggest that the more closely this is defined in writing, the more closely this is made public to the entire world, the more the United Nations is brought in, the more the world opinion can be turned against American warmongering. And that is the critical thing. Unless these issues are brought to the fore at the front of the talks, and unless the terms are clearly spelled out, it will be very hard to take action afterward.
Okay, Marcus, we have 1 minute if you want to add to your comments.
Yes, I do. An American pledge in writing would be welcomed, but in the long term, it would not mean anything. After all, America has violated the NATO-Russia Founding Treaty of 1997 by positioning NATO forces in Eastern Europe. Secondly, when NATO bombed the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in 1999, the Americans, who are the de facto leader of NATO, violated Article 1 of NATO's founding treaty, which clearly stipulates that NATO will never use force to resolve a dispute. So an American pledge in writing is not worth the paper it's written on.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all the time we had. John Bosner, journalist, activist, and political analyst in Belgrade. Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author in London. Thank you for your contribution, and thank you for watching this edition of the News Review.